Winter arrived without asking permission, the way it always does in small towns that believe they've seen everything. Snow fell in a patient hush, soft as breath on glass, covering mistakes, footprints, and the things people didn't want to look at too closely. Years later, when I try to remember how it all began, I don't think first of the shouting or the sirens. I remember the sound of a child's boots crunching through untouched snow and the slow, uneven gait of a dog who had already given the best years of his life to other people. Lila Grace Monroe walked before the sun most mornings, when the world still felt undecided. She was 9, slight as a winter branch, wrapped in a coat that once belonged to someone bigger and warmer than her. Beside her moved Ash, a retired police dog whose black and tan fur had begun to gray around the muzzle. His badge still hung from his collar, though it no longer opened doors or commanded respect. It clinked softly when he walked, a sound that reminded him of who he used to be, and of who the town believed he was now. They did not hurry. Ash could no longer manage that. His left hind leg dragged just enough to remind him of the injury that ended his service and, according to some voices, his worth. Lila adjusted her pace without thinking, her hand resting near his shoulder, but never pulling, never urging. She had learned early that love was not loud. Love stayed. People watched them through frosted windows. Some shook their heads. Others said nothing but remembered everything. The story had traveled fast when Ash was retired. How he hesitated during a drill. How his instincts no longer aligned neatly with commands. How it was safer, kinder, more responsible to let him go. No one asked where a dog went after usefulness. No one asked how a child might learn to carry rejection when it walked beside her on 4 tired legs. Lila heard things adults assumed children didn't understand. She heard the word unstable, spoken the way one might speak of cracked ice. She heard broken, past his prime, liability. Once, at the corner store, Mrs. Holloway leaned close to the cashier and whispered, "That dog should have been put down," as if mercy were a blade you sharpened with indifference. Lila said nothing. Ash lowered his head. Snow melted on his back and disappeared. That morning, the air felt heavier than usual, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the ridge, 2 officers had driven out hours earlier for a routine winter patrol, tires cutting tracks into the white that would soon vanish. Officer Daniel Rowe had been thinking about resignation papers folded in his glove compartment. Officer Caleb Finch had been counting the days until spring. Neither of them knew that the earth was about to close its mouth. Lila and Ash reached the edge of town where the houses thinned and the land opened into unfinished spaces, half-built structures abandoned when money ran out, a scar of a construction site waiting for a future that never came. Ash stopped. It wasn't dramatic. No barking, no sudden lunge. He simply halted, nose lifting, breath changing. Lila felt it before she understood it, the way a child senses a storm before the sky darkens. She followed Ash's gaze to a wide stretch of snow that looked no different from the rest, smooth and untroubled. The wind whispered over it, like a warning too soft for grown ears. "Ash," she murmured. His ears angled forward, body tensing in a way it hadn't in months. He took a step, then another, slow but certain, pulling her toward the open ground. Lila's glove slipped from his collar as he moved ahead, paws pressing into snow that gave slightly under his weight. He stopped again and pawed once, tentative, then looked back at her, eyes dark with something that felt like memory. She knelt, pressing her mittened hand to the snow. It was colder here, dense, packed strangely. Ash pawed again, more urgently now. Dirt showed through white. Lila's heart beat faster, though she didn't know why. She thought of the officers, of the way sirens sometimes echoed through town, and then fell quiet again. She thought of how Ash used to come home smelling of snow and metal and purpose. She stood, brushed snow from her knees, and turned back toward town. The sheriff's office was warm and loud with radios and coffee. Sheriff Tom Alder listened with half his attention as Lila spoke, words tumbling out in a rush she tried to contain. He glanced once at Ash waiting outside, snow gathering on his back like an accusation. "Sweetheart," he said gently, already reaching for the next report. "Dogs dig. It doesn't mean anything." "But he won't leave," Lila said. "He never does this." Mrs. Holloway was there too, leaning against the counter, lips pursed. "That dog's confused," she said. "Poor thing doesn't know what he's doing anymore." Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks, sharp as the cold outside. She nodded once, because that was what children did when adults decided something was over. She turned and left before anyone could tell her to go home. Outside, Ash rose when he saw her, tail giving a small, hopeful sweep. Lila didn't speak. She just walked back toward the open ground, faster this time, heart pounding. Ash followed, his limp forgotten in the urgency of movement. Snow began to fall again, thicker now, as if the sky were trying to erase the choice she was making. They reached the spot. Ash dug. At first it was careful, restrained by years of training, by commands no one was giving anymore. Lila dropped to her knees and began to scrape at the snow with bare hands, ignoring the sting as cold bit into skin. Dirt filled her nails. Her breath came out in white bursts that felt too loud in the quiet. "Ash," she whispered, not as an order, but as a promise. "It's okay." Something in him broke open then. Ash dug with a desperation that startled even himself. Earth flying behind him, breath ragged, muscles burning with a purpose he thought he'd lost. The badge on his collar clattered wildly, a small, defiant sound against the falling snow. Lila's fingers went numb. She pressed her ear close to the ground, listening not with certainty but with hope, the kind that grows only when everything sensible tells you to stop. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just wind. Just snow. Just the quiet judgment of an empty place. Then, faintly, impossibly, came a sound that did not belong to winter. A knock. Once. Then again. Slow. Deliberate. Human. Lila froze. Her breath caught somewhere between fear and wonder. Ash stopped digging and lowered his head, ears straining, eyes wide and bright. The earth beneath them answered once more, a muted rhythm from below, as if someone were tapping on the inside of the world, asking to be let back in. Snow kept falling, soft and relentless, but for the first time that winter, it felt like it was waiting. The sound came again, firmer this time, as if the earth itself were answering a child's faith. Lila pressed her palm flat against the frozen ground, tears stinging her eyes, not from cold, but from the sudden, terrifying clarity of knowing she had been right. Ash let out a low sound from deep in his chest, not a bark, not a whine, but something older, something that had once guided him through smoke and ruin. He dug harder, each movement fueled by memory rather than muscle. Below them, in a pocket of darkness the size of a coffin, Officer Daniel Rowe counted his breaths the way he had learned to do overseas, slow and deliberate, refusing to let panic steal what little air remained. Dirt pressed in on all sides, heavy and unyielding, the weight of the world made real. Beside him, Officer Caleb Finch held onto a torn piece of radio wire as if it were a lifeline, knuckles white, lips moving in silent prayer. When the knocking answered back, when hope returned the sound, Finch closed his eyes and wept without sound, saving oxygen, saving belief. Ash's paws were bleeding now, dark spots blooming in the churned snow, but he did not slow. Pain had become a language he understood, one that spoke of duty rather than fear. Lila tried to help, her small hand scraping uselessly at frozen soil, her breath coming in sharp sobs she refused to let turn into crying. She spoke to Ash the way she always did, softly, steadily, telling him she was there, telling him he was good, telling him he was not finished. Time stretched and thinned. The sky lightened from steel to pale gray. Somewhere a crow called. Lila's fingers burned and then went numb again. She thought of warm kitchens, of adults who knew better, of the ease of giving up. She thought of the way Ash used to sleep with one eye open, listening for a call that would never come again. She stayed. When the sound of engines finally broke the quiet, it felt almost intrusive, as if the world were barging in on something sacred. Sheriff Alder skidded to a stop at the edge of the site, followed by a rescue truck and a scatter of deputies. He took in the scene in a single breath, the dugout earth, the bloodied paws, the child kneeling in the snow, and something in his face shifted, settling into a gravity he had not worn in years. They worked quickly then, hands and tools moving with practiced urgency. Lila was lifted gently aside, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of coffee and wool. She didn't look away. Ash tried to follow the rescuers, collapsing once, then again, until a deputy knelt and held him, murmuring words meant more for himself than the dog. The ground opened, reluctantly, as if ashamed of what it had tried to keep. Daniel Rowe emerged first, pale and shaking, eyes blinking against the light, as if seeing it for the first time. He reached out blindly, fingers brushing fur instead of fabric, and clutched Ash's collar with a strength that surprised everyone. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking on the words. Caleb Finch followed, coughing alive, tears freezing on his cheeks as he laughed and cried in the same breath. The world exhaled. No one cheered. The silence that followed was too full for that. Snow fell gently around them, erasing the worst of the mess, softening edges. Sheriff Alder knelt in front of Lila, his voice unsteady as he thanked her, as he apologized. She listened, nodding politely, but her eyes were on Ash, who lay on his side, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on her with the quiet certainty that had always been there. Later, when blankets had been replaced with warmth and the town's shock had begun to turn inward, people spoke differently. Words like unstable and broken fell away, replaced by a heavier, more difficult silence. Mrs. Holloway stood at a distance, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for something to say that would not bruise her own pride. No one moved to fill the space for her. Ash recovered slowly. His paws healed, though the scars remained, thin white lines against dark pads, reminders etched into flesh. He did not return to service. No one asked him to. Instead, his badge stayed where it was, not as a symbol of authority, but of endurance. Lila brushed his fur each night, careful around the places that hurt, her touch steady, grateful. In the weeks that followed, the story traveled far beyond the town, shaped and reshaped by voices that had not been there. Some called it a miracle. Others called it instinct. Lila knew better. She knew it was listening. She knew it was staying when it would have been easier to leave. Winter loosened its grip eventually, as it always does, but something remained changed beneath the thawed ground. People greeted Lila differently now, softer, as if she carried a truth they were only beginning to understand. Ash walked with his head higher, his limp still there, but no longer defining the space he occupied. And when I think back on it now, when the years have added their own quiet weight to the memory, I don't think first of the rescue or the recognition. I think of a child kneeling in the snow, trusting a dog everyone else had dismissed. I think of the way dignity can return not through applause, but through being believed. If you're listening to this story, carrying your own small doubts, your own worn-out loyalty, remember this. Sometimes the world is saved not by those who are loud or certain, but by those who stay. And if stories like this find a warm place in you, if they remind you that worth does not fade with age or injury, stay with us. Subscribe to Whispered Tales, and walk a little longer in the quiet, where these truths still live.